Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our midweek Hebrew word study. We are in the book of Ruth, chapter 3. Thank you for all those who were patient while I was out of town on vacation for a couple of weeks. We had a good time, and it's good to be back. And again, hope you didn't miss the studies too much, and we'll try to give you a little segue in as we begin chapter 3, verse 11. Just to recap, is that Ruth, who is kind of the heroine here, main story character, she has approached Boaz into the threshing floor. Remember this love story of what's going on here, and Naomi kind of directing Ruth because of Naomi being familiar with the customs in Israel, and Ruth being an outsider from Moab, not understanding how these uh, relationships work, followed her mother-in-law's direction to go into the threshing floor where Boaz was sleeping um, in the threshing floor in the pile of grain, as it's somewhat assumed. And she comes, uncovers his feet. He sleeps through the entire thing, and suddenly in the middle of the night wakes up, sees this woman there. A little bit of exchange, interchange, finding out who she is, and so this is where we pick up with this story because she is presenting herself to him, and of course she's very vulnerable. She relies upon, that his mercies and good graces are going to um, prevail, and that she will find favor with him. And so, verse 11 it says, Vata be teased. Now, my daughter, Al Tir. So this is Tir ear. Do not fear. Again, very interesting how he alleviates her fears right away. Can understand there was not, you couldn't flick on a light switch. I don't know how they were able to see one another, if there was enough moonlight or ambient light from other sources. But they do exchange this conversation. He alleviates her fears and says that he will do all she requests. And then says here that, that everyone knows, all people of the town know, as I know, that you are a virtuous woman. What we want to look at here is this word used for virtuous. I'm going to go to the commentary, and where I have this word circled, it's called Eshet Chayil. And if you are exposed to any type of Jewish literature, Jewish teaching, you hear any Hebrew songs that are religious of any type, you may hear a song called Eshet Chayil, which is called the virtuous woman. And what this gives us an understanding here is if we go to Proverbs chapter 31, verse 10, we understand the story of the virtuous woman, which is read a lot in many churches around Mother's Day to commemorate mothers. But notice the words here, verse 10 begins with Eshet Chayil. So this is where this whole um, Proverbs chapter 31, verse 10 is based upon, and it uses the same language as what Boaz is using for Naomi as he sees her, this Eshet Chayil. So I think that's kind of interesting here. We're going to look at the rest of the commentary here in verse 11, see if there's anything that we want to share. Obviously, this is a very interesting situation. This is in the middle of the night. They are alone. They are not married. This is obviously going beyond normal social um, protocol of what a woman and man being together in the middle of the night. And so this is just all interesting to see how they are dealing with this. And so what he brings up here in relationship to, they all know, all the men in this gate of my people, and the gate of the people know that you are a virtuous woman. What the sages say this makes reference to is the something we talked about earlier, is the law of the Moabite. where God had decreed, because of how horribly the Moabites treated the Israelites when they came out of Egypt, that no one could be admitted into the congregation of Israel. No one could be admitted into the temple to worship for so many, it was many, many generations, and it might have even been forever. But here's where they talk about this law of the Moabite law, not the law of the Moabitus, meaning the males would not be able to be accepted, but a female could be accepted. And so, interesting how they try to provide a way for this story to have merit and to overcome some of these other indications of, that she maybe wasn't worried. And so here, worthy of being a part of this. So here they talk about these people that sit at the gate are the Sanhedrin. What we also want to bring out here is some of the customs of the day. The gate of the city is where all of the transactions took place. It's where legal debates took place. It's where the judges sat. They didn't have courthouses and legal institutions where you go and hire a lawyer and go and meet in a courtroom. You came to the gate of the city. And this is where you would plead your case with the judges, and it's where all these major transactions took place. And I find this kind of interesting is in the New Testament, Jesus makes a comment during the time of his resurrection, when it's being talked about and all what's taken place. And it makes a comment about that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. And I've heard many different topics used to describe that, but I think historically it goes back to what we're talking about here, that in the gates of the city is where the judgments were pronounced. In the gates of the city is where sentencing and either being pardoned or being condemned were taking place, because that's where the judges were sitting. So when Jesus made this comment about the gates of hell, he was responding to this custom of judgment being taken place, and that those in authority who would be condemning those who were now covered by the blood of Jesus and forgiven would no longer, the, anyone sitting in the gates of hell would no longer have the ability to exercise judgment over them or to pronounce condemnation. So again, very interesting to see how, again, Old Testament Hebrew Bible supports New Testament apostolic literature. So this comes up again with the sages. So going to verse 12, he now says that, oh, by the way, there's a little snafu here. There is another person, kinsman redeemer, who is closer to you in the lineage, and he has actually first right of refusal here in doing this situation, and that he's going to have to take care of this. Now, what I want to point out here that's somewhat interesting too is the terms used um, are goel for kinsman redeemer, and you'll see this is the Gimel Aleph Lamed. I'm going to go to the um, other portion here that I can circle them and show you the word a little bit more clearly. So the word is goel right here, and it's translated as redeemer. But if you're familiar with when you read through your New Testament, you'll find that Jesus is sometimes referred to as Jesus of Galilee. And the name of the city, Galilee, is based upon this root word of Goel, or redeemer. And so I think it's just a beautiful understanding here that Jesus is from the city that is uh, has a name based upon the Redeemer of Galilee, or Goel, based upon that root word. And I don't think it's any coincidence at all that that happened that way, that it occurred that way, and that as we read about it and see that Jesus has come from Galilee, that we would anybody who grew up in that time frame and understood the Hebrew scriptures and Hebrew would have made that association between Jesus being the kinsman redeemer for our salvation and the uh, understanding that he came from a city whose name was based upon this root word of kinsman redeemer. Again, just beautiful to see how all this plays together. So jumping ahead to verse 3, this is an interesting situation. You know, they're in the middle of the night. Here's a unmarried woman, unmarried man. They're alone together. Which is not social protocol. What does he tell her to do? You know, does he tell her, scram, you know, get out of here before anybody sees you? We can't be alone together. He invites her to stay the night. This is really interesting. So, verse 13, um, Line halayala v'haya. So, stay the night, and it shall be vaboker im yigadel, and in the morning, I will talk to this close relative, and we'll get this taken care of. And if he's willing to perform this kinsman redeemer ceremony, he can do it. And if not, I will definitely be doing this. And he even makes somewhat of a covenant here or an oath, and he says, "As Anochi Chai Yahweh, for as the Lord lives." So he makes this covenant, shows how intent he is on taking care of things and taking care of this situation. There definitely, you can see God working. You can see that he has um, a love in his heart or a desire in his heart to establish this relationship with Ruth. What I want to go back to is looking at the beginning of this verse. In verse 13, it says where it says "stay the night," and it uses the Hebrew characters of Lamed, Yod, Nun, and then a Yod again, and all the letters look kind of the same height. But when we go to this other document here, which is more based upon the Hebrew Sefer, which is the Hebrew writings, the Hebrew book that they read in the synagogues, you'll see that this Lamed is large and it has a little star by it. So we want to scroll down and see what the sages have to say about that. And so, okay, so here the sage of Minchas Shai observes that in some texts, the Lamed, the letter Lamed is enlarged, and in some texts, the letter Nun, which is the last consonant of this word, is enlarged. And in some texts, neither is enlarged. It's meant to just bring attention to it, and it doesn't seem like they are um, really able to explain what's going on. But again, that's something that you will see in the Hebrew text that is not translated, not talked about in our Christian translations, but it definitely sticks out if you're reading the Hebrew that you would be aware of this. And again, this goes into the whole thing of, okay, he's telling her to stay. They're violating social norms. What is going on here? And he wants her to stay the night. Well, what's this all about? So let's see how she responds. We get to verse 14. It says, "So she lay at his feet until morning, and then she arose before anybody could see her, recognize one another, so it was still dark." And you can imagine that this was a time where how did they even sleep? I mean, if you just can put yourself in this predicament of what's going on here and how they're interacting, there's obviously feelings growing between them. He has promised that he would redeem her or marry her. She's in here by herself. Remember, she's all dressed up. She's, presenting herself in her best possible appearance. And I doubt that any of them slept the night. And even though it says that she lay at his feet until morning, it doesn't say that they slept. Could it be that they were, talking to one another, getting to know one another? It would only seem normal that neither one of them could sleep with just the anticipation of, uh, of what was going on, the anticipation of what would happen in the morning, maybe even a little bit of fear that they would be noticed, that someone would see her leaving, someone would have seen her come in. What if someone came in the middle of the night and caught them together? What would the rumors be? What would the, um, you know, downfall of that be for their reputations? And again, the Jewish sages don't pass up on this. And so they talk about this quite a bit of how the goodness of Boaz comes into play and how he would be a good man and that she was virtuous. And let's see what else they say. Um, they talk about even their being together. They look at some of the spellings of the words and find that there's some discrepancies, and they call it defective spelling. And so from that, they indicate that she did not lie close to his feet. Instead, out of modesty, she moved away. Then they look at this next verse where it says, before one man could recognize them. There's also another defective spelling here, that it has a extra letter, an extra vav in this word. Now, in Hebrew, it does not have any numbers. There's no numerals to count with. Instead, you count with the letters. So for reference, in our alphabet, A would be 1, B would be 2, C would be 3, and anytime you want to write something as far as numerals, you would put, um, you know, A or B or C, and then of course they have the corresponding letters. Once you get to past 9, then the letter for 10 would be used, and you would add A to the letter for 10 and get your 11. So what they notice here is there's an extra vav, which is the equivalent to the number 6. And so they say, well, why is there an extra letter in here? It must meant that she spent 6 hours with him. And so they also point out that they can further appreciate from this length of time the extent of their self-control. Obviously, the sages don't miss a beat here, and they know that this was not a proper place for her to be, but yet pointing out that nothing immoral happened between them, and that they're looking for ways to justify this, and they find it in just one extra letter of a word. And again, just think how cool this is, that we can see this in the Hebrew Bible that we cannot see in English. So Boaz, obviously knowing the situation, said, it cannot be known that a woman would come into the threshing floor. And so here, the Midrash, which is a commentary on the Hebrew scriptures, uh, plays on this and said that all night Boaz was stretched out on his face and prayed to the Lord and saying, I didn't touch her. You know that the name of heaven wasn't profaned through me. And it even goes so far there as to say he wasn't concerned for his own reputation because he was known as a righteous man. It was Ruth's reputation that he was concerned about. After all, she went out in the middle of the night and didn't want it to be known that a woman would come to the threshing floor. So again, just very wonderful things on how they um, fill in the spaces between the words and help us to just gain a better understanding. So she got up in the morning before anyone came, and obviously he was not sleeping because he said to her in verse 15, take your shawl and open it up. And he measured into it 6 um, unknown quantities of barley upon her. And of course, this is what's really interesting. The English translations would have to put some designation as to how much barley. So they would say it's an ephah, it was some weight of measure, but the Hebrew itself is very, very cryptic. It says 6 barleys, and it is plural, so we know it's more than one. And the sages, of course, don't let this pass by because it says, what is to be meant by six barleys? Is it literally six grains of barley? That would, you know, not make him look like he's very um, generous if he only gave her six grains. But otherwise, if he gave her six seahs, which is a measure we talked about earlier, if you remember about this huge amount that would have been like 40 some pounds, that was four seahs. Well, this is six. This is even a greater amount. It'd be, 70 some pounds. Rashi, the commentator, says this woman could never carry such a weight. But obviously, he's trying to justify this somehow and figure out what's going on. So he basically comes and says that it's unspecified because he gave her a quantity that she could carry home and that no one would be the wiser, that it would look like she was working and that she um, got some food to take home. This one even says it's enough for a meal, so she wouldn't have to worry about what she was going to eat for the next day. Although we know from the previous part of the story, she took home quite a bit the previous day, and so they would have plenty to eat. But it was more of trying to protect her reputation that she was carrying something home with her that justified her being at the threshing floor and keep people from gossiping and talking. So that's where we're going to stop today. I hope you're enjoying this study. Again, this is just so fascinating and just so appreciate the opportunities that we have to look into the original languages, look at the commentaries that have existed for thousands of years, how the Jewish scholars would have gone through this and talked about it and debated it. And you can almost see them, just debating in their study halls as to what this could have meant and taking different positions and debating back and forth. And must have been a really exciting time and how much they learned and how you can learn from these verses and just feel like we're doing the right thing by studying in this way. So God bless you. Hope you have a good rest of your week and look forward to being in touch with you next week. Bye bye.